thank you everyone to my panelists who've come to talk to us about the growth of women's football and various opportunities and challenges that are involved. So as everybody knows that women's football is exploding, very much so since the Euros in 2022. Women, it really is in a growth spurt, breaking records all over the place. There's a sellout here at Wembley, the FA Cup final this summer. I was here, it was amazing. And Arsenal opened this season at the Emirates with 54,000 people, is that right, in the stadium? Pretty epic. I think the World Cup final was touted as the most watched women's sporting event ever. BBC reported 12 million viewers for that final, and I was looking at some things to compare it to. So the men's Wimbledon final in July was less. Barbie was 18 million, so there you go. Women's football, somewhere between Barbie and men's Wimbledon. So with that, players catapulted into the limelight, loads of sponsorship deals, making headlines, commercial opportunities, lots of investment. Money is starting to flow into the game, and it's pretty exciting. StatsBomb have been giving teams free data since we launched in 2018, which we were very happy about, very proud about. But what I would really like to talk about now is what that really means for the teams on the ground. What is it like for the players? What is it like for the coaching teams, the analyst staff? And so I have some experts here to help me out. So we have on the far side, Laura Ravanilla from AC Milan. So Laura is a match analyst with 5 years of experience. She's got a degree in economics and sports science, coaching license, match analyst license, and works for AC Milan now, previously at Juventus and Napoli. So thank you, Laura, for joining.
Hi all, thank you.
And we have Jo Moore from Arsenal women's team. So Jo's the head of analytics at the team and heads a team of 8 people. So Jo's going to talk to us more about his experience at Arsenal. Previous to that, he was the head of football analytics in New Zealand for the FA there. And welcome Anna De Souza. She is a football analytics consultant. She started her career at CONCACAF, working with women's football, and in 2022 began working with the Jamaican women's national team and helped the team through the qualifiers and through the World Cup. So she's got some great experiences and stories to share with us. And Nathan, welcome Nathan. Nathan is the assistant GM and chief soccer officer at Gotham FC and has leveraged his statistics degree from Harvard to make data-driven evidence-based decisions at Gotham. And they've had quite the turnaround from bottom, is that right? Bottom of the league in 2022 last year, and now a contender for playoffs. So really big growth there. So thank you everybody for coming. So we're just going to get stuck in. So perhaps Jo, I'll start with you. If you could tell us a little bit about Arsenal and what it's been like working with the women's team there since you joined.
Yeah, sure, Charlotte. So I came into position at the football club about 18 months ago. So relatively fresh into the role, but kind of living the day-to-day of what you discussed in the introduction, really. We're seeing huge increase in terms of coverage of the game. It's growing exponentially at kind of an alarming rate in a way. And off the back of that, in terms of games at the Emirates, obviously numbers in terms of tickets being sold, we're seeing huge expansions in what it looks like in the background staff. I was speaking to one of the kind of leaders in our leadership group the other day, and in the last 2 or 3 seasons, we've tripled in staff size. So that goes right across the business. We've brought in more coaches. We've set up a recruitment team. We've increased the numbers of staff in our performance team. And one of the elements, obviously, that we've had to grow off the back of that, as you touched upon, is our analysis department. So when I came into the building kind of 16, 17 months ago now, we had 2 analysts working full-time with the first team. So I was the 3rd member of the team that came in, and we expanded the first team department at that point. And this season, we've grown exponentially in other areas of the business. So we've brought in 3 academy analysts who work across different phases down there. We've also brought in 2 recruitment analysts who work full-time and align closely with our wider recruitment program at the football club to help specifically the recruitment process for the women's game. So yeah, exponentially we're growing each year, and hopefully we continue to grow next season as well.
That sounds exhausting.
Yes.
How do you manage all the hiring and constantly training of new people in your team?
Yeah, so I mean the club are quite good in terms of aligning wider process. So a lot of the recruitment hires, as an example, were taken care of by the wider recruitment department. So they align quite closely to the club-wide recruitment. We have a recruitment lead in the women's space who is obviously involved in that process as well. And it kind of filtered down to someone like myself as they move throughout that process, so I could be involved in the recruitment of those kind of members of staff as well. But yeah, to your point, really, it's growing so alarmingly quick. You have to try and work very quickly to firstly hire the correct people, but then get them up to speed in terms of what we need them to do on the day. So yeah, there isn't a shortcut for it, unfortunately.
No.
It just means a very busy summer period for us in terms of bringing members of staff into the building.
Oh, it's exciting times. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the comparison with men's game and sharing infrastructure and such in a minute. But Anna maybe can tell us a little bit about what it was like to be at the World Cup with Jamaica, the Reggae Girls.
For sure, yeah, no, I think it's a life-changing experience. I would speak about like the non-US, non-Canadas, non-Englands, how different experiencing a World Cup is. And for us, like going into the 2023 World Cup and coming out of the 2019 World Cup, it was like really defining like how we can improve with what we had, right? Because we don't have unlimited resources and just capitalizing and institutions like StatBomb that are able to, give us free resources to, better and compete equally as, I would say at the same level as like in England or USA is tremendous in terms of the players. I think pretty much the landscape is a little bit different as well. Our players didn't really play in the top leagues in the world, the top teams in the world. So this World Cup really changed that and pretty much elevated the market price for a Jamaican footballer, like a reggae girl or even a reggae boy, right? So that's something that, oftentimes doesn't get mentioned, but it's something that's predominant in our reality, right? And then for myself, as well as the coaching staff, we all kind of took separate ways after, a very successful World Cup, but it doesn't matter where we're at, right? What matters is what we've done. And there's a saying in Patois, it's called "Wiliko but Witalawa," which means we're small but mighty. We're capable of doing anything. So that's something that was ingrained in our DNA going from the beginning all the way to the end when we finished 13th place. So that's something that is incredible. From the more data analytics side, right, going into the tournament, we did look at a lot of different metrics, such as like improvement, retention. We knew going in we weren't going to be on the ball a lot, and we were kind of going to be like the underdog. So we did create certain models to measure where we're recuperating the ball, right? We emphasize a lot of recovery, and then also just retaining the ball and playing purposeful possession, if that makes sense. So that's something that we took very, very seriously. And going forward, hopefully, with this momentum in the women's game, as our colleague here was talking about, it's just a matter of continuing, right? So hopefully the conversation doesn't end here, and it just keeps going and going, right? Because we deserve the space, and
I'm
we're here
glad
to stay,
that
right?
we were able to support.
Yeah,
It was
no,
really exciting to watch.
Sure.
Was it just you working as an analyst with the team then? Were you the sole user of data?
Yeah, so for me, my role was video and data analyst, so I supported the head performance analyst. Luckily, I'm very grateful for Sanford because he is very understanding of what data represents and what data plays a role in the game. So he was very receptive, and I remember like a day before the game with France, I'm like, hey, look, it's available, so you need to make sure we use it in some capacity. So just for me, it was quite a bit of a challenge because I needed to think how he thought and put everything into his language, right? And his language is more on the coaching side and on I would say more the assistant coach side rather than a data side. So empathizing in that regard and almost as a translator or an interpreter when it came down to reading metrics into, I would say the actual performance piece of it, right?
It's really, really interesting and really different setup to Joe's setup at Arsenal, but actually the sort of task of translating data and making it understandable by coaches and it's very similar. How about you then, Nathan? How have you achieved the changes that you've made at Gotham and sort of got the coaching staff on board with data and data-driven methodology?
Yeah, so for a little bit of context, Gotham FC is the professional women's soccer team in the New York City area of the NWSL. We were the worst team in the league last year by a healthy margin. And so I came in at the end of last summer promising our ownership that if we invested in data and analytics as a strategy, we could exploit the fact that soccer is behind some other sports in terms of how much we invest in analytics. Women's soccer is even further behind than men's soccer. And so that gap allowed us to say, if we invest in this before other women's teams in our league, then we will be able to jump right back into the top of the league very quickly. But before overwhelming the ownership and the coaching staff with models and numbers, I laid down 3 analytical thinking principles that we wanted to follow during the off-season. These words will actually mean something to you all, but the first one was trying to maximize variance. So since we were the last team in the league, the only chance that we had to become a good team and not just a slightly worse team was if we made decisions over the offseason that would maximize variance at our club and across the league. The second one was using a Bayesian framework for decision making, so allowing independent streams of information to converge into which players do we want to sign, which players do we want to move. So having some sort of separation between coaching staff making their decisions, our data and analytics team making their decisions, and our previously existing ownership and general manager arriving at our decisions, and our scouts. And when those conclusions converged, we could feel more confident that we were making the right choice. And then the third big principle was trying to control what we can control. So minimizing randomness, for example, by focusing on building a roster that would maximize chances created under the assumption that chances finished and scoring is a little bit random. So when we had to do a big roster overhaul, we were focusing on what are the things that we can actually control, and let's focus on those first, and then we can worry about the things that are up to chance.
And how did you get engagement from the coaching team? Was everybody fully into it, or did you have to persuade?
Yes, so I had a massive privilege that a lot of people in this room, I know you wish you had, is I got to choose my coaching staff. So being in a decision-making role at a point where we made a coaching change meant that I was involved in our interviews with head coaches and the coaching staff that we ended up putting together. It was very important to us that the staff that we brought in didn't have to be data people themselves, but they had to be open to working with a very data-driven front office. And what we really liked about the coaching staff that we brought in was that they were definitely open to incorporating data and analytics into their decision-making, but more than anything, they want to do anything they can to win and to be 1% better. So when we frame things in terms of here are things you can do that are backed by information and evidence that will make us 1% better or 1% more likely to score a corner kick, then they are all on board with that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's very, very different, isn't it, team to team? Laura, how is it for you at AC Milan? Do you have similar experiences to Gotham, or is it different?
It's quite different because also for a cultural reason we're more likely to work with video rather than more with data. Is something that we want to improve, in particular in our women's first team, because we know that data are playing an increasingly important role now in everything we do, both in analyzing our performance, in the analysis of the opposite team. What we are doing now to start is to find the best KPI to give efficient information to our staff and to our player, because also the players are new, talking about data. So we are trying to educate them. We are trying to make them understand the importance of the data. So we're trying to give them tools, useful tools, so they can bring directly to the field. In fact, I think that efficiency in our job, also we have a lot of games during the week, during the month, is the key to obtain results. So this is really important, and also we work a lot on individual growth of the player. We think is the key to improve also the collective, and we use a lot of video, a lot of data. So also video really important for us, because we know that when we saw video of something we know, we activate the same mirror neurons that we activate in the field. So we are doing a lot of this kind of activity individually, and as I said before, we have to educate them also to the use of the video and to the use of the data.
No, it's really interesting. I'm really interested in the like player involvement in data, and there's definitely a shift in that direction, in players being more involved in data feedback and such. And are there, do you have sort of language difficulties as well with players and like StatsBomb data's not in Italian, for example?
Yeah. Nowadays we have a team from with a player from every part of the world. We have a Jamaican player, we have a player from Sweden team, the captain of the Sweden team in the World Cup, and also Italian players. So we are trying to find also terms and parameters that everybody can understand easily in the pitch and during the game, really important. So communication is one of the difficulty we have with data, with language with data, but also, as said before, we have to educate them to the importance of the data, not just a matter of comparison, I did well, I did not well, but also to understand the meaning of data, where I can improve, what I can do better, and also during a game, why I did this, okay, why I received this data after the game. So it's a long process, and we are trying to develop it during the time. And also because sometimes girls tend to find excuses. So after a performance, so we are trying to put them the idea that the data is an objective parameter, okay? So we have this, but we have to understand why we have this data, and not to find excuses to a bad or a good performance, but to understand why I have this parameter, why I did this, so it's really important for us.
Yeah, it's really interesting. What do you think, Joe, in terms of how different that is to Arsenal? And is it it's not a women's football thing, it's about the team and the maturity of the team and the size and the amount of investment that they have?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things that we've intentionally tried to develop at the football club since I've been in, and this is very much driven from the coaching staff, is trying to create a culture where the playing group want to learn and are central to that kind of part in the process. So us as a technical team, analysts and coaches, we can provide the playing group with a framework to do so. We have good resources with regards to the number of staff, good resources to how we can access video and data and how we can provide that to the playing group. But we definitely want the group to take ownership of how they reflect and review themselves. So the IDP coach who's come in this season, one of her remits is really to engage the players individually, to build out programs for them where they can reflect on their own performance using video and data, but making them the kind of key point in terms of how they drive that moving forward. So preset goals and targets are things that we can do in those meetings. Giving them access to the resources that they need to be able to do that is certainly something that we do. And then the ability to be able to have check-in points with the coaching team or analysts when necessary to be able to drive that themselves as well. I think that's been very important for us in trying to build that kind of reflect and review policy that we've kind of built within the environment this season.
And how do you find the sort of experiences of the athletes themselves and how much they sort of want to get involved in data for women's football compared to like your previous roles with men?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of the playing group that we have currently. Obviously, I can only speak about that group with regards to kind of women's football at the minute. But they're very reflective. They want information, whether that's through data or through video. They want us to be quite specific when we look to break things down, again, whether that's through video or through data. So we try and tailor the way that we interact with the athlete a little bit in terms of how we frame up our meetings. Sometimes they'll be in much smaller kind of meetings in terms of the size of the group we have. We regularly run unit meetings, individual meetings, on top of the team meetings that we would run throughout the week as well. So with the thought process of those being, we want to try and give the players a voice in those meetings to be able to communicate, ask questions, probe a little bit more when we're presenting video and data back to them, basically.
That's why you need so many more people to
Correct, yeah.
have so many small meetings.
Exactly that.
Yeah. And how is that different for you, Nathan, or does it sound similar?
So we run all of our player communications through the coaching staff. That is also a way that we make sure that we're aligned with the coaching staff on buy-in, is that they get the final say on the information that gets presented to players. So we can discuss with coaching staff as much as we want in terms of anything, set piece strategy, feedback on specific players, looks at what went wrong in a game, but then they internalize that and they pair that up with their game style and game model, and they're the ones that will have all the individual sessions with the players.
So do you feel like you have the sort of structure and setup to translate things like the knowledge that you get in events like today and sort of advanced analytics and insights that are happening? How do you translate that to the coaching staff?
Yeah, it starts with very, very constant communication, and we have standing weekly calls where just the data analysts are getting together to discuss things and just the scouts are getting together to discuss things, but we also have a standing meeting where our coaching staff and our scouts and our data analysts and our front office, me and the general manager, will get together to make sure that all the strands are being pulled together, and that has allowed for really good information sharing across departments over the course of the year.
Yeah, a good setup around you.
Yes.
What was it like in the World Cup then, Anna? Did you have a similar structure? Or?
I always say national teams are a little bit different than clubs.
Yes.
First off, you don't have really control on a consistent basis of what the players are doing, right? From like a loads perspective and what information they absorb, right? So for us, it's like a bit different, but everything like similar to Gotham is streamlined through the head coach. So he's, the one that ultimately makes this decision. But like I previously mentioned with the head performance analyst, so the way it worked is that I reported to him, the head performance analyst, and then the head performance analyst consumed it. And then he pretty much was in charge of either setting up the set piece plan, setting up how the initial setup of how we were going to take on teams, right? And then likewise, actually the final lineup is always the head coach, right? So, but when it comes to tactics, it's head performance analyst for the most part, and then the ultimate decision would be
So what
the head
are what would you say like the main challenges as an analyst with the national team?
Yeah, I guess from the national team perspective is the availability of data, right? So in our case, we looked at a lot of the individual, right? Because it's important to see what our players going into a World Cup were doing, but then also trying to measure their like bad habits or like good habits or habit in general. So for us, it was complicated because, like I said, our players weren't WSL, mostly like championship, NWSL, but didn't get enough minutes type of player. So that was a challenge for us on the individual side, but on the team side also likewise, finding a provider that has games from us from 5 years back, 3 years back was also a challenge. But StatsBomb, I remember having a conversation with you guys like last year, and there's nothing, and then all of a sudden there's something. So it's good that from a production standpoint or a data provider standpoint, that's being invested in. And likewise, I know FIFA has a lot of investment in what's data analytics in terms of their unified models, et cetera, and just making sure that every team gets what they deserve, right? So
I'm glad you said that because we
Yeah,
say
yeah.
that we'd listen, but now you actually
Yeah,
have
yeah.
proof. There we go. We listen. And how do you find it, Joe, in terms of getting data availability for your team?
Yeah,
on the recruitment
it's
side?
we've talked about it a little bit, obviously, off the stage. It's a challenge. It's definitely an area that's growing. StatsBomb have been very good in terms of how they've grown, in terms of the coverage that they have and leagues that they're currently covering, compared to when you guys started in 2017, 2018, I think it was. But we're not where we need to be yet in terms of a wider pool. So it's definitely an area that we're trying to push data providers in terms of more coverage of leagues. more coverage of video, which obviously was an exciting announcement this morning in terms of what Ted covered. So yeah, hopefully we can continue to move in the right direction, which allows us to build out our workflows, particularly from a recruitment side, but also from a performance side as we play in Europe, and make them even stronger for us moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And video availability is a hot topic for everybody
Massive.
at the moment, I think. So I'm interested in just digging around a little bit into sometimes how the women's game gets compared to the men's, and all of you have worked on the men's side of the game as well as on the women's side. What do you think are the main, at Arsenal, for example, you have a lot of benefits in sharing infrastructure and sort of gyms and training grounds and such, and how does that work? Is it sort of an opportunity in your opinion, or does it present some challenges in sort of constantly being compared?
Yeah, I think we're in quite a fortunate position at the football club. There's obviously been a lot of investment from the football club since I've been in the building, definitely. We share site at Colney at the kind of main training grounds. We've had a bespoke building built for us in the last kind of 12 months, so that obviously helps in terms of space for the team, but also for the backroom staff as well. That's grown substantially, as we discussed earlier. We share resources, as you've discussed, so we have access to all of the things on the site that we would need to. So I think definitely for us that has been a huge benefit and a huge advantage in terms of scaling up our side of the business as quickly as we have done. And obviously in terms of like where we're going and the direction that we're moving, we're seeing us play more games at the Emirates. We're seeing sharing a lot of the kind of resource that the men's first team are using as well. So I think that will continue to grow. I think one thing that the club has, particularly in the women's space, is it has very good history. So we have our own fan culture. We have a number of people that have been with this team for a long time, and as that grows and has continued to grow over the last couple of seasons, we're seeing maybe fans transition from the men's to the women's and supporting both in kind of more wholly. But we're also picking up probably our own fans along the way as well. So I think we're probably in a little bit of a different situation in terms of having the history in the women's game and where that's allowed us to build a really good base from. So hopefully we can continue on that kind of that shift and that momentum and utilise anything we can off the wider club to kind of move in that direction as well.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, it's really good when it's a real benefit to the team.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you feel in Laura, where you are, in terms of comparison to the men's game? Does it happen, and how much sharing of facilities and such do you get?
Okay, we are in the same club as the men's side, but we don't share the same facilities as the first team, as it happened for Arsenal. We share the same facilities and structure with the youth sector. But it is really good for us also because we have a good training ground with 7 pitches, free with cable camera. So we have a lot of this. And obviously, it can be useful also to change information with the first team, but we are trying to also to improve this aspect. And women's football in Italy has changed a lot in these years from when the men's team has started investing in women's football, because before we didn't have the same fan base as Arsenal, so it's changed a lot, and also has improved the investment with the clubs in facilities, in technologies, and it made a lot of differences, obviously. We can improve because in Italy is a new project, is a new movement, and we don't have the basis also that with the federation that has invested a lot, but the results was not good also in the last World Cup, so we have to improve to make the clubs and the federation invest more, and also to reduce the comparison with the men's team. So it still remains a little bit of prejudice, so we have to improve our level to work better to reduce also this thing.
Do you mean that outside of the club?
Outside,
from the fan base?
obviously outside. Inside, we are really treat really well. I'm not saying because I'm part of the club, obviously, but because it's this way. I also work for Juventus, and it's the same. And now Fiorentina, I was talking with them that Fiorentina has this, now will train in the same facility with the men's side. This is new, so there are a lot of changement, but the perception outside of our club also still remain a little bit with the old mentality and the old culture. So we have to improve. We have to work a lot to go over this situation.
So there's a lot of change still to come in Italy, specifically culturally, as well as on the football side. Yeah, interesting. And how do you think, Nathan? Where do you go from here when you're a team that you've set up some very advanced processes in comparison to other teams around the world? What happens when the rest of the MLS realize and copy or continue developing? And
Yeah, well, one thing that we are looking at on the same topic of comparing the men's and the women's games is in the numbers. I think a lot of what we know about football comes from analysis that has been done on the men's game. And so we're not taking it for granted that that is also automatically true of the women's game. So we're doing a lot of really foundational analysis that may seem simplistic, and in a lot of cases we come to the conclusion that what is true in the men's game is also true in the women's game, but it's still important to go through that process so that we really actually know what our starting point is. Where we're going from now, or from here, is we've had a lot of teams look at the fact that we went from being the worst team in the league to now being in a place where we would be hosting a playoff match, that they are also now starting to realize that if they invest a little bit of money into analytics, that they could also improve their processes. I know there are people here from other NWSL clubs now, so we really want to keep pushing and staying at the forefront of analytics in the women's game. That means that we are being creative about which ways we use to expand the firepower that we have in our analytics team. We've partnered up with Harvard University, actually, to teach a soccer analytics course where students can get credit and learn hands-on about the latest and greatest in soccer analytics, while also helping the club answer some research questions that will improve our decision-making process. And we will continue to add people to our team. So we are right now actually hiring for a full-time data analyst role. So if
there might be a few.
Yeah, if anyone in here is interested in chatting about that, or if you know someone who might be good, we are going to continue expanding our data analytics team and capabilities.
So, I mean, you touched upon data similarities there. That's quite an interesting topic. Are there any changes to data that you would ideally like that are specific to the women's game, or do you think that the data that is available from various suppliers, including StatsBomb, meets what you need?
So I think the level of analysis that we're doing at Gotham is sophisticated enough that things like the 360 data that is available for a lot of men's competitions and on the women's side is only available now for the World Cup and the Euros is something that would be massively beneficial to us to really dig into. We have a team that has a very, very distinct and discernible playing style based on our coaching staff's coaching philosophy. And so our team's positioning is really important. It's also very easy to know how we are going to line up against other teams. So understanding if setting a high line by 1 meter, either way makes a difference, will actually make us 1% better. And so we really are looking forward to the day when we get that 360 data in the NWSL.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what main probably question to sort of throw out really, but what would you like to see different if, let's say, the men's game didn't exist at all and you just got to set things up specifically for women's teams? What would you do differently or set up differently?
I would start the collection process earlier for the women's game. Try to collect as much as possible, just because, like I previously said, it was a challenge for teams that are not USA, non-Canada, non-England to, benchmark or see growth without prehistoric data, right? So if something that I would change would probably be that, and maybe even the first World Cup in '91 and make it maybe 1960, just to,
Just giving us
kind of even things out of the
project.
You can't change history, though.
What about you, Joe?
Yeah, I think kind of just doubling down on Nathan's point, really, and Anna's point as well. Larger data in terms of historic data sets, availability to data sets that we don't currently collect in the women's game, 360 being one, obviously, in this space. Having access or playing in stadiums that allow for collection of location tracking data, those kind of things would be massively beneficial to us in the women's game, and that will come. Like, that's inevitable now, particularly as we see teams across all competitions play more and more games in larger or main stadiums, as we're kind of calling them now. So I think that's not necessarily something that will be different, but it's something that we obviously want to move in the direction of, so we can start building out better workflows and utilising more data and different data to inform our decisions on the pitch and in the preparation and review of games.
So do you think if the data was available, if you had tracking data in your hands, you'd have the processes and people able to integrate it?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Currently, at the minute, in terms of where we're at, we would, yeah, if we could pull location data now, we would be utilising it in our analysis workflows, definitely.
How about you, Laura?
No, I agree. And in fact, I was talking about that, for example, in Arsenal, they have the opportunity to have the tactical footage of the game, and it's something that we are trying to do also in Serie A, but we're sharing this tactical footage also to help us to improve our level of our work. And that, I think, also we have to understand that if the data we have now, the parameter we have now, the metrics we have now are useful, are good also for women's game. Also, we have the next step, I think, will be to understand if the same parameter, okay, is the same for women and for men. We are working a lot of them. I know that also StatsBomb is working a lot of them, but also the pressure. I understand how the pressure is done for a woman, but obviously we need a lot of video, a lot of data sets. So it's something that we are doing. The companies, the suppliers have to do in a long time. So it's a long process, but I think that this is different to understand the difference between a men's and women's game is really important to improve our level of work.
Yeah, and there's bound to be lots of differences in thresholds and how the data kind of plays out. So we talked a bit about hiring, difficulties of getting people in, training them up, data availability. What else are the big challenges for you guys? What keeps you awake at night?
Yeah, so for us, our league is built around the central premise that competitiveness is important. And so there are a lot of rules around the college draft and the salary cap that exist to keep teams as close as possible, to create as much parity as possible. So within that context, any advantage that we may gain one year will be gone the next year if we don't continue to innovate. And so that's what keeps me up at night, is that we constantly need to be improving on what we're doing to stay at the top.
Yeah, I kind of agree to Nathan's point. Obviously, it's a little bit different in terms of how we operate in the European leagues. Like, we're starting to find the bigger clubs in Europe are beginning to become more competitive and consistently competitive across the kind of the big leagues we have in the women's space as well, and in the Champions League as well. But we're seeing, I think WSL is a very good example of that currently, a much more competitive league, much more competitive space, which is great for the game. Definitely provides us a challenge in terms of needing to be continually competitive and continuing to grow. But I think that just comes down to how we resource, how we work, and how we work with staff and prioritise our workflows as well. So slightly different to Nathan, but I definitely think we're seeing a competitive level of the European leagues increase massively now, which is great.
And as funding starts to happen, then growth follows.
Yeah, massively.
I was going to piggyback off on the national team level, at least specifically in CONCACAF. Like, you see more and more teams being competitive, right? You see like Panama, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Haiti, right? You have Melchi Dumornay, who probably had the highest transfer market value or like fee or whatnot playing in Olympique Lyon. So from the national team side, the gap is getting close, much more narrower. So I think that's all benefit to what this is all about, you know?
And they probably make it slightly more polarized as well, perhaps.
Yeah.
Like the teams that are getting money or even individual players, right, that have like greater sponsorships and such.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Should we send it out to the floor? Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
How are you dealing with the medical analysis? Like, I know I'm a fellow Arsenal, so Arsenal had a lot of ACL injuries. Is there a lot of investment going into the medical side of it from a data point of view?
Yeah, there will be. It's obviously not my area, but it's certainly something that the club are looking at, and not just the club. I know it's a wider issue, particularly in the women's game at the minute, and there's lots of people across different medical and performance departments coming together to try and, firstly, like work out what the issue is, and then obviously provide solutions that hopefully over a period of time we'll see us start to bring those kind of injury numbers come down. But it's certainly something that our performance team, and not just in our women's space, club-wide, are looking into currently in association with other clubs and other FAs to try and ultimately get to the bottom of the problem.
Go for it.
So you mentioned that, Nathan, about recruiting coaches who are specific to the game model and the sort of strategy that you have. How do you see that changing across women's football in general? Like, do you, this is all to the full panel, do you see this as a lot of men's coaches transition to women's, or would you see almost this organic growth and would that be a preference?
Yeah, so the question was about how game models and coaching staffs go together in the women's game and how that's changing. Our current head coach, Juan Carlos Amoros, actually was Tottenham's women's head coach for 10 years. And so the things that we really liked about him was that he had a long track record of coaching a competitive women's team. That's just because of the way that the women's game has existed or not existed in a lot of places for the last few years. That's very rare. I think women's soccer is not men's soccer, copy pasted. So I think we will continue to see more specialization into women's soccer that learns from a lot of the history of men's soccer. The other thing that we're seeing in our league in the NWSL is that there are now actually more discernible game models. Before, I'm going to go back maybe 4 or 5 years so that I'm not offending anyone who is still coaching in the league. But it was very uniform, very monotone, a lot of kick it and run, and not a lot of really tactical nuance. So I think as the women's game continues to evolve, I'm thinking specifically in the US, but I think it's true across the world, then you will start to see more teams that actually have a very recognizable style of play that other teams can then learn from.
If I can add one important thing, I think that now we don't have to talk more about, for example, training coaches that arrive from women's football, from men's football, or women's coaches or men's coaches, but I think it's really important also to understand the human part also, or the technical part, because one of the specifics of the women's football is like the mental and the psychological part of the players. So we need also coaches that understand the game, but also this part. So it's something that we have put a lot of attention.
In terms of the psychology of coaching women, do you mean?
Yeah, it's so different, and is probably the most important part. Also, when we transmit a message to the team, before we talk about the individual analysis we do, the individual work we do with the players, the mental, the psychological effect we create when we transmit a message is quite more important than the message in itself. So also the coaches nowadays have to understand that the women's football is not, as Nathan said, copy and paste, but also all of this part. And also during the game, how we work during the week, how we analyze the game, the message we give them during the halftime. So a lot of specific aspects.
Thanks. Any more questions? One. Okay, Simon.
What are the downsides of the rapid increase in attention and money?
Yeah, I think commercially, obviously, not many. I would say from a scaling perspective, we're probably at a growth rate that we've not seen in the sport before. So it's not necessarily downsides, it's more challenges. We're having to scale up staffing sizes. We're having to scale up the exposure in terms of what the exposure is for the staff, but also for the players and the athletes as well. So it's more of a learning than I would say a downside in the sense of needing to get to a place very quickly. Yeah, that just presents challenges, I think, in the day-to-day of the role in terms of how you set up your departments, how you bring staff from a place from where they were a few years ago to where they need to be now. I think we talked about, obviously, expansions and tech teams growing is a good example of that. We've gone to a place at Arsenal where you now hire specialist coaches, so we would have a set-piece coach and an individual coach, which is, I know, quite common in the men's game, but it's starting to now drip feed into the women's game. So when we have to scale up staff or when we have to employ new staff, as analysts, we now need to think about bringing in people who have a skill set in potentially some of those areas as well, if that makes sense, or bring what we would call probably generalists who have been doing kind of all of the program to a place where they might specialize in certain parts of the program in quite a short time frame. So I think they're probably the challenges, I would say, that we're facing currently.
We've faced some of those at StatsBomb as well, growing pretty fast. And when you're hiring, you always have to think ahead of where you are, and obviously takes time to find good people and train them. And
Agreed, yeah.
and then you need more.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we've got time for one more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We have to build workflow effectively that you can pivot from the best stadiums in the country to much smaller stadiums, and that is a big challenge. That frames up how you try and build particularly your match day workflows, obviously. Yeah, I think that's a really good point and something that obviously we both have to navigate at the minute, and will become less of a problem over the next 2 or 3 seasons, definitely.
A problem for video and data providers as well.
Yeah, exactly that. Like we talk about data collection, not having the stadium that is fit for purpose to collect data or record video in the way. That's obviously one of the big challenges that we face at the minute.
Yeah, it certainly is for us if we only have them for part of the matches in a season.
Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Challenging times. Well, thank you everybody here for coming and joining me. Thank you for everyone for listening.